I hit my arm on the arm thingy. Anyway, hi everyone, welcome back. Sorry my audio is a little annoying right now. I didn't feel like hooking up my mic and everything. It was too much. But anyway, hi, welcome back. This is part 2 of a 12-part Saturn series. And today we are chatting with Adina and Maya about Saturn and Pisces, and I'm so excited to share this video with you all. It was such a great conversation. We did the same general outline, general roundabout that we did with Saturn and Aries. We looked at things that were going on in history the last time Saturn was in Pisces, and then we look at some expectations for Saturn and Pisces coming up in 2023. It was a really great conversation. It was really fun. It was very Piscean, and I'm actually really excited, not excited, but I'm really glad that I chatted with two people with Saturn and Pisces about this placement, because that was always a really tough placement for me to delineate, like Pisces. And we chat about this, but it's difficult. It was difficult for me because like my Saturn placement is very different from Saturn and Pisces, so that contrast was definitely one that I needed to learn and understand. But I'm really grateful for having this discussion, and I hope for all the Saturn and Pisces folks out there, it really helps you as well. And then next up is Saturn and Aquarius. When is that going to be posted? I'm not sure. Have yet to record it, but that's okay. Saturn and Cap and Saturn and Sag are going to follow. If there are any Saturn and Sagittarius astrologers out there, hit me up, because I can't think of any off the top of my head. But yes. Okay. I hope you all have a fabulous day. I hope you all enjoy this video, and I'll catch you on the flip. I'll see you next week. Also, I'm not sure what my video next week is going to be about, but I'll let you know. Okay, bye. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm here. Hello. I'm here with two fabulous astrologers who are going to introduce themselves in a second, and we're going to talk about Saturn and Pisces. We are recording on Saturday, April 10 at 11:56 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, if you guys want to introduce yourselves, please go for it.
Yeah, I'm Maya. I also go by the Cardinal Center or Night Shift Astrology on whichever social media platform, both on Instagram and Twitter. I'm a Cap rising, Aries sun, Gemini moon with Saturn and Pisces. So Saturn's my chart ruler, so I'm excited for this.
I am Adina. I use she, her pronouns. I go by Adina Rising on all of the social medias. I'm a Scorpio sun, Taurus moon, and Scorpio rising. And obviously I have Saturn in Pisces, which doesn't necessarily rule anything in my chart, but is the only planet in my chart that can see every other planet. So Saturn is just always watching me.
Amazing. You know, that's fabulous.
Like the painting on the wall,
Yeah.
and then the eyes follow you everywhere.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I'm really excited to chat about Saturn and Pisces. I always kind of feel a little like Piscean when approaching Saturn and Pisces, and it's been a placement that has always brought some sense of confusion, honestly, for myself. I feel like personally, with having Saturn in Aries, I'm like, and so when I approach Saturn and Pisces, I'm like, but how are you doing this? Like, how? It's interesting because because of that aversion, but because of that, I'm so excited to talk with you guys about it, because like there's nothing more interesting than like piecing astrology together with people who actually are living with those placements and with those experiences. But yeah, no, so let's just dive into things. I could just say that Saturn and Pisces is a mutable water sign. So considering all of that stuff, with Saturn being the planet of limitation and time and longevity and all those sorts of things, we're going to consider all that while we are chatting through and referencing history, because that's like why we're here, you know. We're here because we are timekeepers. We know what has happened, we have the precedent, and then able to build conclusions and interpretations based off of that. So who has thoughts first?
Yeah. I can share my thoughts. So Saturn in Pisces as a representation of Saturn in a mutable water sign, to me really just shows up as like your limits, especially as like a personal placement, like the limit that exists as like the Saturn concept is something that is constantly changing, and it has such great depth. Like it's almost as if like the limit really is just like as much as you can imagine, like taking that like Piscean like fantasy element, like the fantasy element of Pisces that comes with being ruled by Jupiter. Like there is a broad expansiveness of like what could actually happen in Pisces, but with Saturn there, it's just like, all right, what materially are you capable of doing? What are you like physically capable of doing? What are you mentally capable of doing? Like what kind of limitations are you actually putting on yourself? Is a big thing with that, especially for Cap risings with Saturn and Pisces. But it's like kind of taking that idea of like, what are you limited by? Technically nothing, but it could also be everything.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I think it's so true. It's like, what are even the limits when you're in mutable water, which is kind of just the most flowing, most like unstructured place you could be. And this quote, because Kira Taborn of The Astrology wrote articles about like all of the millennial Saturn signs, and this quote from her Saturn and Pisces article, the rules of the sea are different than the rules of the land, but there are rules nonetheless, just like resonate so much with how I see Saturn and Pisces, that it's like there are rules, but like you have to adapt the rules to the environment. Like Saturn and Pisces, of course, is coming off of like Saturn and Capricorn, Saturn and Aquarius. So as Saturn moves to the zodiac, we get that same pattern where it's like areas where there are very strict rules and able to build structure, and then suddenly Saturn and Pisces is like, okay, there's no structure, so how are you going to adapt your rules? Are you going to try to hold on to the really strict rules in a place where they don't fit, or are you going to let all the rules go and just be Jupiter and say, fuck it, I'm free to do whatever I want? Or like how are you going to set the rules? I think that's because, Saturn being, of course, peregrine in Pisces, unless, there's like term dignity or whatever, like there's no triplicity, no domicile, like Saturn doesn't always know what to do in that environment, I don't think.
Yeah,
It's
definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. I feel like sometimes, sorry. I feel like not knowing what to do is a really good point. Because if you think about Saturn in domicile and Cap in a cardinal sign, there's like, we're doing something. We are putting in these earthly forms. We're doing it. In Aquarius, it's like, we're figuring this out. We are going against the popular way of doing things, and we're going to be kind of talking a lot and sharing all these ideas about it. But in Pisces, it gets to a point where you're like, okay, I feel like it's a really interesting transition phase, and I feel like that's true for all mutable energy, generally speaking. It's like, okay, what are we going to do next, and preparing for the fire that's coming with Saturn and Aries following, and with that befallment, Saturn being in fall in Aries, it's kind of this this transition period. And I loved not having a limit. I just thought about the limit does not exist. And I feel like that's so just like Pisces in general. It's like, what? No, we don't. Just keep going. Keep going. Yeah.
Right. And the thing about that, because you mentioned, like, I love that you mentioned like the whole like Saturn in Aquarius, and Aquarius as a sign energy in and of itself as an archetype. being a place where there's like communication and there is like this kind of widespread, like, these are the rules, this is what we're agreeing to. But in Pisces, it kind of becomes more of a silent thing. I mean, Pisces being a mute sign, so it becomes less of like, all right, this is what we're saying, like, this is what we're saying we're gonna do, this is what like the talk is. Now in Pisces, especially with Saturn being there, the energy is going from like, all right, we're talking about these rules, we're agreeing on these rules socially, and agreeing that this is the structure that we want. But now when things are quiet, when things are nocturnal in that space, what's actually going on? What's the truth? You know, Saturn being in a Jupiter ruled sign, like there is that kind of connection of like, like there's the connection between Saturn and Jupiter and like the ways of like creating that truth, where your ideals meet your reality. Your ideals meet your reality. It's like, oh, okay, this is what's actually happening. And then in Aries, it's like, okay, now we see the way things actually are working. Now, what do we need to change?
Yeah. Very like the order of the zodiac is just kind of like really puts that Pisces in this transition space for Saturn, especially because of that. It's like it would be jarring to kind of go from like domicile Saturn to like fallen Saturn. That would just like, I feel like that would just create constant conflict. Like the Pisces is almost like a necessary container for shifting things, which
right.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I noticed, I mean, obviously like the Saturn and Pisces generation of like the mid 90s, which I assume we're both part of.
Yeah.
If you're not in your 50s.
I would look really, really good if I were in my 50s. I am not.
But yeah, so the Saturn and Pisces in the 90s, that was like when Pluto moved from Scorpio into Sagittarius, and there was like a little bit of a retrograde back, and then that kind of sparked the catalyst for all the outer planets moving. And Saturn, the next Saturn in Pisces, which will be our Saturn return, is when Pluto moves into Aquarius. So
yeah,
like, it's been this like container for a major shift, is like the Saturn in Pisces place. It's literally like holding liminality and holding like transition rather than holding something solid or breaking something down. Wow,
that was brilliant.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I think maybe serves as a good segue to talk about some of the things that I'm like, I think in order to like really get a sense of what Saturn and Pisces is about, especially with Saturn and being like this is a planet that kind of keeps track of our reality, noticing all of what you said as it occurs in like these Saturn and Pisces periods in like the past 3 decades that it's happened, or like past 3 generations that it's happened rather. It speaks fully to its like the experience of Saturn and Pisces. It's really quickly, so like Saturn and Pisces in the mid to late 30s is the container that that World War II literally kind of like kind of germinates and like starts to kind of like seed and grow within. In the 60s, it's the literal germination of like all of these student rights movements, including it's getting more active. I think I like pointing out the student activity of the 60s as like a whole thing, because it was the students that were really like leading a lot of these movements, civil rights, the anti-war movement. These were young people getting in like together and being like, hey, we're still fighting about these same things. Like nothing's changed since the 30s. Very little has changed since the 30s in terms of these like social policies and the ability for us as a society to take care of one another. Those questions and those conflicts kind of germinate in these like Saturn and Pisces periods. It's just, same thing in the 90s, like when we were born. It's just like this time period of like, okay, so we're getting more globalized as a community. The internet's becoming widely available to people. But then we're also getting like the real inklings, I think, of what we're kind of coming to see now as like this white supremacist, like very right-wing retaliation to all of this social programming that happened before, and all of this kind of attempt to create a social net for others, kind of coming to this germination, the same germination of like, all right, well, what's going to happen now? Like, I'm very excited and very terrified for Saturn and Pisces, not just from a Saturn return, but like the trends are
Yeah, no, let's go through some of them in some detail. I because you're so right, like there are so many significant changes that were being in transition periods that were being facilitated during those time periods. Should we start with like earlier in the 60s, or shall we start with the most recent Saturn in Pisces? Whichever you guys want to do.
We can like maybe talk about, maybe we can start with the 60s and talk about some of the threads that like ran through
Definitely
both and kind of are recycling, and maybe even like get into sort of what we're seeing now, because obviously we're on the precipice of the next Saturn and Pisces transit.
Yeah, although I do want to interject really quickly, because I realized that I personally didn't go back further, but like even Saturn in Pisces in like the turn of the century, again, this germinating period of like World War II or World War One happening right before that. And like, yeah, I want to go back to that in a little bit, because there are some Saturn and Pisces people that I think like of that time that really kind of like their work really expounds on that topic a little bit more.
Yeah. Who were some of those people, those folks in the 30s, you said, right? Are we starting there?
Yeah, well, so the two people that I kind of like noted just from like the era before, like the turn of the century, so in like 1905, 06, people that were born at that time, and then like most of their work actually kind of came out in the periods that we're like going to be talking about, like in the 30s and 60s. But the two like biggest names I have are Hannah Arendt and Jean-Paul Sartre. Which I wrote, like kind of like put them in our like little pre-show notes, is in like, okay, this is the person who, Hannah Arendt was the person who literally coined the term the banality of evil, and then Jean-Paul Sartre literally like revitalized existentialism in the way, and like his work brought us the phrase hell is other people. And if that's not the most Saturn and Pisces shit.
Honestly, existentialism is such like a Saturn and Pisces philosophy. I say this having like taken a class in existentialism before and being like, wow, this is so correct. I love this. Like, it's so much like, because philosophy especially can be like so structured and so strict, and it's like, let's build all these systems and figure out how everything works. And existentialism is kind of like, but does it matter though? Like, does any of this really matter? And you get into all this like absurdism and so much of just like playing with the idea of like what even can be true, and like what is a structure, and also in like plays too. Like there's some fascinating existentialist plays that just, there's one, I think this one Beckett play where there's not even words. It's just this guy like, where there's this pitcher of water and he keeps trying to grab the pitcher and it keeps getting pulled away from him. And it's like a whole play of him trying to catch this pitcher. And then eventually he just gives up and the pitcher's right in front of him and he doesn't even reach for it. And I don't know why, but that just feels right for this conversation.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's, first off, that's delightful. I brought up existentialism because it's something that like I am of course attracted to, but I don't necessarily, I don't like haven't read all the plays. I haven't read, I'm not a philosopher per se. But yeah, it's that constant like, what does it mean that my actions are in this large way futile? Like it's kind of go back around and like go back to like this time, like the time periods that like, you know, what was happening with Saturn and Pisces. Yeah, let's start at like the 30s. Let's start back there where all this work was kind of coming out, this existentialist work.
Definitely. Do you want to describe some of the 30s during that time? The 30s during that time. What? The 30s period. There were, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think we definitely like, and just looking at research document, we did a little more on the 60s, but I think Maya made a really good point about how like the 30s was kind of the Saturn and Pisces of the 30s, which was roughly 1935 to 1938 for like general reference. So that's like obviously right before, you know, Saturn and Aries when World War II like fully broke out and, you know, the Holocaust began. Like a lot of these things, obviously they didn't come out of nowhere and they were brewing in this transition period when I guess kind of the old structures were sort of breaking down. There were a lot of vulnerabilities, like it's like politically throughout the world, that then Saturn and Pisces really like without the sort of structure and agreements and sort of appropriateness to hold that, I think Saturn and Pisces created that avenue for a lot of intense worldwide unrest. And it's been many years since I did anything with philosophy, but it does kind of seem like, yeah, a lot of that existentialism is responding to that sort of sense of like the whole world that we know is sort of falling apart and nobody really knows what to do about it.
Right. Yeah, I took a few different, I took a lot of notes and I'm just like, I don't know if I should type all this out. So a short list of the events that I kind of have like written down as like, these are Saturn and Pisces as fuck. So we've got the Dust Bowl. We've got the New Deal and Social Security happening. What else? This is a fun one. The first synthetic radioactive element was created while Saturn was in Pisces. I forget which one that was because there was another one that was synthesized in the like 90s, I believe. But I'm gonna do my little sidebar Gemini moon research really quick.
That's so like Jupiterian as well, you know, like it's very the Dust Bowl was a very like it was affecting so many people. I mean, as huge things like that do anyway, but I feel like it was this slightly chaotic sight obstruction sort of experience. And what was the other one?
Oh, the New Deal and Social Security.
Yes, that's still that that energy of wanting to somehow create some sort of structure that then allows this sort of opportunity and sharing growth-ish within that in a way. My history is fleeting from my brain around that time. I feel like that was one of the first. The New Deal was,
I think it was one of the first like major social security programs that,
right?
Like,
yeah.
ever, Adina,
like,
sorry.
Oh yeah, it was just like a huge, I think, expansion of the role of government from what a lot of things previously, like that time in history. I think things are just so bad that FDR was going to be able to like pass law after law after law in a way that nobody's been able to really do since.
Right.
Very true. And I mean, like thinking about that as like a cause and effect was like, what I was noticing in like my kind of research is that there were, I didn't like list every single one, but there were a lot of these like really big, natural disasters that occurred. I think across every Saturn and Pisces period that I looked at, there's always some sort of like huge natural disaster, which honestly kind of makes me think about it, Saturn and Pisces too, in a sense of going back to that existentialism and that like kind of futility in life. Well, how can you really, like, what can you actually do, rather, when for the people, when it's like the planet is attacking us. It's like the planet is our enemy right now. We've got the Dust Bowl, we've got like mad sorts of tornadoes, like all of that. Like what does it mean to be a human and to have a human reaction to things when it's like what you're trying to react against is something that you have no control over.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's a troublesome and really frustrating experience to have, trying to find some sort of I don't want to say solid ground, but trying to find, something to kind of hold on to while you are being like attacked, as you said, by the planet. And like in these ways that are very like creating this sense of taking away that clarity. In a very broad, like widespread way.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it's dust though. You know, I would expect it to be water, but at the same time I feel like maybe I don't know too much about how the Dust Bowl generally. I don't really remember. I feel like I remember learning about it in AP Environmental Science in high school, and I only took that because it didn't require any prerequisites, so I was like, sure, why not? But we learned about it, but I don't remember the deets of it. I just remember that didn't it like start because of farming? And there was like a really big something with agriculture, or am I pulling that out of thin air?
You know what? I don't think you are. I also need to go back to AP World History and AP Environmental History. It's been almost a decade since I've been out of that game, but but like that makes sense to me in a way, because it's not necessarily, as I kind of go back to what I just said, as I often do, it's not necessarily that it's like, oh, the planet is attacking us on its own, like free will. It's willy-nilly, like I'm gonna like, cause these storms and like have a little hurricane, have some tornadoes. It's not quite that. I feel like a lot of these major events, like a lot of these natural disasters that happen in these Saturn and Pisces periods, are also in a way man-made. Like they come from our abuse of the earth. They come from our abuse of the tools that we're given, and so they're like, that's the natural disaster is the retaliatory effect. It's the cause and effect kind of part of like what Saturn has to offer, especially like Saturn in a Jupiter ruled sign. It's all about cause and effect in that sort of way. Which, to even like kind of push that point further, even the wars that get started in this time, or in these times, and the conflicts that happen in these times, come from inherently a kind of disrespect and a disregard for one's kind of natural sovereignty, in like a really like base way, down to, I mean, like really obvious in the 30s, leading up to the World War II, of course, but then even in the 60s, like, I mean, like, yeah, especially in the 60s as well, but like even in the 90s, we kind of get this sense of like, the crime bill, the war on drugs, and all of that. I think the war on drugs was Actually, no, that was Saturn in Pisces. Yeah.
I think it
All of these
started
kind
a
of.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. What were you gonna say? A little bit earlier or later?
Yeah, I think the war on drugs was first started with Nixon, and then Ronald Reagan was like, "Let's go," and
Yes, Reagan
then
was like,
Clinton and Bush, except like carrying. But I feel like I'm missing one of them. I always forget that order. It was like someone, and then Nixon, and then
oh, it was Bush, or
after Reagan, right?
Yeah, Nixon,
yeah, it
Reagan,
was Bush after Reagan, then Clinton, then
Then
Bush
Clinton.
again.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, throughout that whole, oh wow, I still feel like that's a transition period, because looking at all the things that were going on here, that was Clinton, wasn't that in
Yeah,
the
no,
mid 90s? And I
in the
feel
mid
like
'90s,
because
that was Clinton.
prior to that, the Republicans, I studied political science in undergrad. Prior to that, the Republicans were primarily in control of the House and the Senate and had presidency for like a good amount of time. And Clinton was the president that was like, I'm not the Democrat that's not hard on crime. Like, I'm going to be tough on crime, just like the Republicans essentially, but I'm going to be a little bit more charming than they were prior, literally. So yeah, it's still that transition phase from having this structure one way previously and it being so like obvious to it morphing images and transitioning into this new perception of I feel like, I don't want to say freedom, not freedom, but more so this new perception of I feel like it's Jupiterian energy of this like things can be great if we kind of work with both, and
Right.
if we like
ideal,
right,
the idealism that's inherent in like this
exactly,
kind of relationship between this planet in this space ruled by this other planet, where it's kind of like diametrically opposed.
in a way.
Like their meanings are like okay, well, we have structure, we have limitlessness. What do we do when we combine them? Yeah.
Yeah. I also like the pointing out about Nelson Mandela. I feel like that was really, really, really interesting. If someone wants to speak to that, because we chatted about that in our pre-show chat, didn't we? About Nelson Mandela during Saturn and Pisces in the mid 90s. Yeah.
Because Maya was like, we were in this document like typing before this, and Maya was right about Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa in the 90s during Saturn and Pisces. So it made me go back and look about when he was imprisoned, and it was during the previous Saturn and Pisces period was when he was sentenced, and it was actually, there was this Saturn retrograde station like literally on the degree of his IC in Pisces when that sentence was handed down when he was initially imprisoned. And so there's really interesting, Maya, if you want to speak to more kind of that arc.
Well, just to think about it in the sense of like in the sense of noticing with Saturn and Pisces, and I think this is like true for like any kind of period, like there's always some person that kind of like stands out as like you are a representative, like an archetype of this time, of this placement for this time rather. And like Nelson Mandela hits those notes like really, really hard, like as someone who was going in and like actively like protesting, and like his work, like all of his work was about, you know, taking back power from these colonial forces, carceral forces, trying to alleviate the oppression that his people were feeling, right? and that goes to for like a lot of the main figures in these like periods, regardless of whether they were right about it or not. But yeah, like noticing like this kind of like the change of the guard from being like in one Saturn Pisces period, Nelson Mandela is literally imprisoned because of this fight, and then in the next he's given a peace prize, awards, all of that, and like, you know, that's the Saturn return of his going to jail. Which is kind of crazy, right?
So in the mid 60s he was arrested and imprisoned when Saturn stationed on his IC, and then in the 90s was when he became president. Both of those times Saturn was in Pisces.
Yep.
Yes.
Wild. Astrology is real.
Astrology is very real. No, what I guess to kind of leave this conversation to be a little more like fluid and limitless in that way, I'm curious as to like, from what we've talked about, what do y'all like, how do you feel like that kind of, especially Adina, I can respond to myself as well, but how does that kind of like filter into like the experience of Saturn Pisces for you and for like, you know, like, yeah, for everyone?
I'm thinking about it and thinking about, you know, these things we've researched and how much of like Saturn and Pisces is about like liminal spaces and transition spaces for a lot of things, like how much it's like the change between one thing and another thing. And I feel like, yeah, I guess thinking about like my personal experience and the experience of like my peers, I guess, here's another interesting thing, you know, talking just about Pluto generations also. I realized when I, you know, would talk to people around my age that like, if you ask someone like, oh, did you have a MySpace account? The cutoff for like people saying no or yes is roughly the mid 90s, like 94, 95, maybe 96.
Yeah.
Like if you're born before that, the answer is probably yes. If you're born after, the answer is probably no.
Yeah, because I have Saturn Aries and I didn't. MySpace was like something that the older kids were doing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But I kind of missed it. Like it. And then, yeah. So, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. I did not, but I was like aware of it. A lot of people around me did. And it's very much just like, you know, at least for the 90s Saturn and Pisces generation, like we're kind of that like cutoff of like, we remember older technologies and kind of things as they were. And a lot of people younger than us, particularly Gen Z, like grew up kind of with smartphones, grew up with a lot of like modern internet, but we kind of have that last vague vestige of the before times.
Oh yeah, I remember the AOL dial-up tone perfectly.
That's hardcore nostalgia for sure.
Yeah, we hold the transition, and we are like so much about having like one foot in both worlds and seeing the in and the out and seeing like multiple different things at once. I think like, yeah, I know that's kind of how I've been processing the experience, is that we're very much like trying to zoom out on things because we have that space too, because the structure is kind of like wobbly.
Right. And it's almost like we kind of have to in a way. Like I mean like, oh god, because like Saturn is my chart ruler, so I've kind of been in this space of like in this idea like that I'm like in this kind of like weird like I'm always the youngest person in some rooms or the oldest person in other rooms, or like was kind of, especially so like Pisces being a Cap rising, my Saturn is in my third house, so it's like the environments that I'm familiar with, like it's less about the specific place and more about like, okay, this has this, therefore I'm familiar with it. It doesn't really matter like that it is kind of functioning in like a way that is sort of different, like, oh, if there's like I guess the only example I can pull up in my head is like Square. Like if I'm like working at a place, I don't work in cafes anymore, but like I could go to any cafe across the world, and if you're working with Square, then like I've got you. I've got the whole setup. I don't need any sort of primer. I don't need to learn anything. It's just like if it's this one specific thing, if it's this central thing, or like this ability to touch on like, to get a little bit more like metaphysical with it, like if it's touching, if things are like touching on certain ideas and certain like feelings, it doesn't necessarily matter to me like if this is like a, you can see I'm pigeonholing myself in my head, like it doesn't matter if it's like a rock song or a pop song or like country or something like that. If it's about something that like I genuinely feel, I'm gonna like that song. It's that like there's like that one anchor in Saturn and Pisces that kind of holds everything together, that keeps the container like a functioning structure, but anything that can fit in that box is gonna fit in that box.
Yeah, like there aren't necessarily like, you can't necessarily like write a list of rules for the box.
Right.
Like, you just kind of know what fits, and it's very very like individual almost. It's very like what resonates with you. I don't know, it's thinking about like in that metaphysical vein, one of the other sort of trends that carried through and looking this stuff up was that the mid 60s was roughly when like there was of course the big boom in like psychedelics and lots of people like free love, doing drugs, whatever, but also like research and more people starting to use this in therapy, because therapy, particularly in the early part of the 19th century, is very like, or 20th century, is very Freudian, very much like here are the rules. It's very much we strengthen the ego, like we get rid of all the messy stuff and we make the ego very strong, very structured. And then and then suddenly like people are realizing obviously like many indigenous cultures have known for thousands and thousands of years, is that there's a lot of therapeutic benefit to kind of going into the unstructured space and like each person taking their own journey and like anchoring through like ritual, but it's very much your own journey. Like when you do psychedelics, you kind of never know what's going to happen. Like you're, as long as you have the like, right, that one anchor, whatever can fit in the container is going in the container. And Saturn in Pisces was kind of like when a lot of that research was cut off by the government, like the structure coming in to say, no, you can't do this. Like,
right,
we're going to make this illegal because it's like too whatever. It's a threat to us. And then it was
and
actually,
that was when Jupiter was in Pisces, right? Or sorry, Jupiter was in Taurus rather.
Yeah, I think it was Jupiter and like Taurus and Gemini. And then in the 90s there was like renewed interest in psychedelic research, and people like kind of trying to get this off the ground again, the government like knocking it back once again. So I don't know, I'm kind of hoping, because I'm kind of now adjacent to that like psychology world of like holistic spiritual, like that, because I'm in grad school doing that, and I'm hoping, and there's like renewed interest in these programs like starting up and they're getting bigger, and I'm hoping maybe next Saturn in Pisces we can get like a renewal of allowing that into a therapeutic space where it's not like you have to go pay thousands of dollars to go travel to South America to do like these therapeutic things that become like wildly inaccessible for most people. I'm hoping we get maybe a tide change.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too.
Saturn, I just looked at the tail end of Saturn and Pisces, just thinking about when that Saturn return is going to happen for y'all. It doesn't meet Neptune. It gets like pretty, Neptune will be at 29 and the closest Saturn gets is 24 Pisces. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of what may begin to, what we may see in terms of that transition. Is transitory a word? If it isn't, whatever. It is, okay, fabulous. A transitory stage, and in preparation for Saturn and Neptune actually meeting in Aries. And I honestly, I really wouldn't be surprised if, because we mentioned this at the beginning about Pluto being in Aquarius when, so when Saturn's in Pisces next time in at the end it's 2025, so Saturn probably ingresses into Pisces around,
It's like 2023, like the beginning of 2023.
Yeah, March 2023. Let's see if it does a retrograde out. Nope, it stays in Pisces that whole time. It stations direct at 0 degrees of Pisces in November 2023. So it's hanging out.
It's gonna be a full.
It's a whole. It's
absolutely
like, let's go. Wow. Yeah. No. So that's gonna be. Wait. Okay. Then where's? Okay. Sorry. Let me look at this really quick. I have this now where Jupiter is gonna be.
Yeah, Jupiter. I think Jupiter is gonna be
in Aries.
Aries. At that point, Jupiter is gonna be in Aries for the first part, and then in Taurus.
Yep.
Which it'll meet up with Uranus, I believe.
Yep.
Wow, that delicious stuff is happening.
It's definitely starting. No, it's like it's definitely starting with Saturn in Pisces. Like, because I'm never gonna get rid of 2026 in my brain. With the astrologer, I don't know why I won't write his name down so I can keep it in my brain. Who was like in 2026 when all the outers are making sextiles to each other. And so I'm everything that we've been speaking about in terms of it really kind of Saturn and Pisces making room for, and I also feel like maybe this may be like an experience that Saturn and Pisces people may have is understanding that like we always have to kind of consider how we can move forward with what we're working with in front of us, how we can kind of make room and make space for that in-between stage, and really maybe even understanding cohesion. I love like just Pisces energy in general, being described as a sign that's interested in finding that cohesion between two things or between ideas, like being Jupiter and that synthesis and connecting the earth and connecting spirit together and figuring out how we can make both of those ideas and those things work, even if they don't seem like they work to other people. And I feel like you both were speaking about this in terms of that energy within yourself of knowing this structure and this system for yourself, and it not making sense to other people, and that being like not that big of a deal.
Right.
but finding so much opportunity and freedom within that. And I feel like that's also very music too. Like,
yes,
music is music, but within it there's so much variety and so much room for creativity and fantasy and imagination. I'm sorry, I don't know what I was getting at with that, but it just
you felt called. It fit in the box, you know. It fits in the container, so might as well throw it in. But like thinking about that time and anticipating that time, like already, like, so, like, you know, I mean we've both gone through like the last Saturn sextile that we're gonna have, right? So I mean, obviously, so it's like kind of even thinking about that as like the last stop on the Saturn return cycle up till you get to the Saturn return. It's like preparing you for what you're preparing that box to be in the future, like what you're preparing to, like what labels you're trying to put in that Saturn and Pisces box. It's like, I know for me it was like an experience of like really getting to reevaluate like what kind of person do I actually want to be, like what kind of labels, like where do I actually fit in, it's like knowing myself, I've always been like a weird ass kid. I basically, like, if my teen self, if my like 11, 10, or like 11, 12-year-old self met me now, to be like, oh my God, first off, bitch, you didn't change. Second off, you're like the dream version of me, which kind of getting back into that Saturn and Pisces, like being able to create the structure that you live in, and having that from me kind of come out as being like, I'm really like creating my own reality, creating my own self, creating my own like narrative, as it were, with each like kind of day, with each passing day, and with each like thing I dedicate myself to, or like with each boundary that I set, and like realize like, okay, I want this container to end here because it's what's best for me, and all of that sort of jazz. Yeah, just thinking about how this like movement, especially like, okay, so Saturn sextile, that was when Saturn was in Cap, so like, yeah, resetting the rules.
Literally.
As painful as that might be at times, especially like that process, thinking about it in like a global sense, like the rules that Saturn and Capricorn kind of taught us about the world, as it were, are definitely things where it's just like, this is the time, like, for us to collectively decide as a society, like, do we want all of this to be in the container? Do we really want all of this to stay in the container of like the United States, or if that continues to be a container anymore, air period, or like the container of self, or the container of like what you like or what you're interested in, the container of like what you want your partner to be. I'm trying to cover as many Saturn in the houses as I can. Like all of that kind of coming to like this like point of like, okay, well, this is what we have to work with in Saturn and Cap. I'm curious to see like, what kind of journey people are kind of making in that sense, and what kind of, and looking out at the world as it is now, like what we're talking about, and the conversations that we're having about authority, about structure, about how we're limited in this world, is going to become very personal for people. Like, it, not that it hasn't been already. Like a lot of things are very, very personal for a lot of people in the way that this world works. But I think as we see Saturn continue to move through Aquarius and back into Pisces, we're going to get this sense of having things hit a little bit closer to home, and like being like, okay, like if this is our anchor, if this is the thing that is kind of like keeping us grounded in all of this ability and non-ability, and all of the vastness of everything and nothing, as it were, like what's actually going to hold people down, what's actually going to like move forward and like emerge as like this Aries action, right? Adina, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that or speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said was like brilliant and resonates and just is so like needed in such a good way, I think, for everybody, regardless of whether they're Saturn and Pisces or not, to like think about what's coming and think about how to use this Saturn period that we're still a couple years out from, but yeah, it's coming.
It's soon.
Yeah, but I think, what you were talking about just reminded me of this. There's actually like a thing that I saw painted on like a street box thing back when I was living in Boston, but it was like talked about like if you pour water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you pour it into a cup, it becomes the cup. Just like the idea that water takes the shape of whatever container you put it in. And like for Saturn and Pisces people, and then for, you know, Saturn and Pisces periods, it's very much like nobody's going to give you the container because like you have the water, so it's your job, like you were saying, Maya, to like build the container. And it's, I think that's the challenge and ultimately the reward for Saturn and Pisces people, is that like we have to really learn to build our own containers.
Yeah.
And that can be this like long process, but you know, one, the joy and bonus of being able to build the container is like we do get to choose, like we get to choose what's in the container and what's out of the container. Like nobody's going to hand us the structure. We're not going to come into the world with like an instruction manual for what.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice though?
I'd love to be a domicile Saturn person and just know how to Saturn.
Honestly,
I wish.
I know some Saturn and domicile people, and I don't think they quite know how to Saturn either. So I think we're good.
That's true. Or they're like complaining about it the whole way. Like it's like Saturn's like, here I am, like too obvious.
As Saturn loves to do, I love complaining.
I'm Jewish. Of course I love complaining.
Yes. Oh God. I mean, when your entire culture is centered on your struggle,
right?
And how you've survived through struggle.
Every holiday,
just the solidarity in that.
We almost died, but we didn't.
Yeah.
We're here. We're moving.
We made it.
Oh wow. This is Saturn in the Jupiter sign, you know? Even though it's like limitation and sadness and like hardcore struggle, and we're like, hey.
But really making the best of it, you know? And I think that's also like another great Saturn and Pisces quality. I think like there is an ability to kind of, like, you know, the ability to kind of like, you know, if it applies, let it fly. If it doesn't apply, let it fly, rather. Where it's like the things can like kind of come into the box, and it's just like, okay, well, this is great. But you know, the ability to also like be able to let things go, to like open up the container and let things out in a sort of Pandora's boxy type way. And it's interesting. So I'm like going back and looking at my long list of Saturn and Pisces people that I kind of accumulated and shared with y'all as well. Like, I don't know, like who do you guys think is like a good example of that?
Why don't we just list some of them off, and then we can like chat through. Yeah.
I mean, I really like, I mean, just to go off from this historical point, we talked about Hannah Arendt and Jean-Paul Sartre. Eldridge Cleaver is a Saturn Pisces person, one of the more, not a founding member of the Black Panther Party, but like a foundational member of that party, and like wrote and helped like kind of create a lot of these programs that we still see helping people today in other forms, as the Black Panther Party doesn't really exist in the same way that it used to. But seeing him as a person who like has that ability to kind of command that there be space given to his work. Sorry, I'm a little bit brain foggy. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add about him, or.
Yeah, no, my history in terms of my like Black Panther Party member knowledge is like really tucked away and hasn't really been tapped into in some years. But they are one of my big, like, not one of, it doesn't make any sense, a group that is the source of a lot of my inspiration living in life. just kind of appreciating. And maybe this, I think this is like, maybe their Saturn in Piscean energy is inspirational to me, because I'm like, okay, you guys were facilitating this catalyst for change, and then Saturn and Aries was coming, and now I'm like, let's burn it down, let's do it.
Basically.
But yeah, no, they, I digress.
Yeah.
One day I feel like there should be some really good research on the Black Panther. There probably is, and I'm just not familiar with the astrology of them. But that would be a really great discussion to dive into, and chatting about each of them.
I feel like that's something that Bear River might be not necessarily like specifically like Black Panther stuff, but I know that his NORWAC talk is centered around like the astrology. His NORWAC 2021 talk this year, his upcoming NORWAC is going to be centered in like astrology and radical movements, and how like kind of those things kind of be changed. I could also be wrong. And I like to, as someone with enough mutable placements to get away with it, I love to open up the container and allow myself to be wrong.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm excited for that. Everyone out there, go to NORWAC if you can. Isn't it? It's the last weekend of May, right? If you can, and also if you want to, because I definitely feel like there's the pushback to NORWAC is very valid. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but whatever. Yeah, it's the last weekend.
I'm not on their payroll.
Neither am I. So, it's the last weekend of May, right?
I think
yes.
Because I thought that was really bizarre, because I was talking to someone else about that, because Mercury stations retrograde like on Saturday, May 29, and I was like, that was an interesting weekend to choose, but at the same time, I don't know what they were thinking.
I think they always do it Memorial
around
Day
that time.
weekend.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's just, but yeah. Some other Saturn and Pisces people that I love that you mentioned, especially like musicians.
Yeah, I have a lot of musicians there. I play.
Being Halsey and Ariana Grande, Kurt Cobain, even Dr. Dre. I didn't realize Dr. Dre had Saturn and Pisces.
Right, I didn't know that either. Dr. Dre and Eazy-E both have Saturn and Pisces, and also like very foundational people in like rap music, right? Like Eazy-E being a like pivot, like so important to NWA, and the energy that kind of came with that, putting I mean the act in of itself of being able to put the label that is being used to oppress you, put that on your album and be like, all right, well fuck it, I am a nigga with attitude, and this is how I express that, and this is how that gets portrayed. Like I understand that rap music comes out of like the nexus of rap actually comes out of Saturn in trying to think of times. I'm gonna get an ephemeris for this.
Wait, really quick. We're speaking about Dr. Dre. I having Saturn in Pisces is thinking about that Saturn cycle. I looked up when he sold Beats to Apple for like $3 billion. And it was August 4th, 2014. Saturn was in Scorpio, making a trine to natal Saturn. And then Mars was also in Scorpio. And I was like, what? I thought that was very, very interesting. Just like having the ruler of that Saturn in Scorpio trine, also being in Scorpio, being in domicile, really supporting that that Saturnian trine that he was getting during that time period. Mm.
Oh, that's funny because I just looked it up, and arguably the like pure start of hip hop and rap as we know it is kind of vague. People were doing similar things in like the 70s. However, like the New York scene of like the Fab Five, Grandmaster Flash, African Bambaataa, all of that all kind of started in like the early 80s, like the early to mid 80s, and that was when Saturn was in Scorpio. Which is
Wow.
really funny.
Wow.
So like this like water trine, especially like, I mean, like that makes perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Who's also having a
Coming
Pluto
to a
sextile too. Sorry.
oh cute. No, yeah. Just thinking
Wow.
about like kind of to like refocus and like the point of this conversation, because I love that we've gone so many different places. You know, if it fits, it sits. But like being able to have that container of Saturn in Pisces, like letting all of those things kind of float within, like making that container, making that space for you and your friends to party and talk about your feelings and talk about the struggles that you actually face. And then for that to in turn be amped up and revitalized and like taken to new heights in this time where Saturn's also in a water sign.
Mm-hmm.
Like amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, I don't want to hold you guys up anymore. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Do you guys have any final thoughts or pieces of advice? Anything that comes to mind in terms of that you want to leave other folks out there who have Saturn and Pisces? I assume that the majority of the people who are watching this have Saturn and Pisces. Yeah. Any last words of wisdom you would like to leave everyone?
I guess the one piece of advice, which is also probably good advice to myself, obviously, is that yeah, um, you Saturn and Pisces is the blessing and the curse of having to really build your own container. And as much as it can be fun to sometimes live in the containerless world, it also is kind of our responsibility to figure out how to build that container and choose what goes inside. And I think resisting the need to build any container can be a trap sometimes. And as we approach our Saturn return, figuring out sort of how to build containers that work and don't feel oppressive but still hold us is kind of our task, and hopefully what we can figure out through the rest of Saturn and Aquarius into Saturn and Pisces to figure out what doesn't feel oppressive but what holds everything together, so that we don't just become all everything, just the water going everywhere.
Yeah. No, I love that. I guess what I would have to say, I mean, yeah, just to kind of piggyback off that, like, it's not necessarily just enough to be able to make your own container, but also thinking about Saturn, thinking about our material reality. We still exist in this world with other people and other things and other entities, like past what we kind of accept in our physical realm, right? So in creating your containers, as it were, or like creating those spaces, regardless of whether you have Saturn and Pisces or not, like I think it's something that we're all going to be like experiencing in one way or another in the coming years, right? So like in anticipation of that, use the time now to like just understand like what is in your atmosphere, and what kind of like what you can actually use, what actually does kind of in the same way that Saturn, Aquarius and Pisces are kind of in this cycle of supporting each other, but not necessarily being able to speak to each other. What does your atmosphere actually support in the term, in like the way that you want to exist? What does it mean in that social sense? And what kind of things can you put into that box for yourself? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This was so fun. And yeah, I hope that this helps folks out there with Saturn and Pisces. If you guys want to let me know, like, or not me, let other people know, just to reinforce how to find you. And yeah, on the interwebs, how they can connect with you.
My socials are Adina Rising across the platforms I'm on, which is mostly Twitter and Instagram. I have a website, but don't look at it right now because it is in progress and I haven't touched it in months. So pretend it doesn't exist. Thanks.
Similarly, I have a website. You can't even see it because I have not published it. But keep an eye out for that. It will be the same. It is the same as my primary astrology handle, which is Night Shift Astrology. Night Shift as in night sect. You know what it is. And yeah, you can also find me on Twitter under the Cardinal Sinner. Night Shift Astrology is my Instagram account. Twitter is where I like to have fun, so like feel free to contact me there and like chill. But like for astrology only stuff, go to Night Shift Astrology on Instagram.
Awesome, exciting. I'll link all that stuff in the description below. But yes, thank you both so much. And I'm gonna stop recording now. Okay, bye everyone who's watching.
Thank you.